Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me at the Selfcare and Leadership Workshop. I'm Dr. Natasha Williams. I am a clinical psychologist, one of the founding directors of Allied Psychological Services in Toronto, Canada. As well, I am a radical self-care and leadership expert, international speaker, and best-selling author. Thank you so much for joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to dive right in so that we can really get a foothold on understanding self-care and leadership. Let's get started. So let's talk about what is self-care in the regards of stress versus burnout. It is so important that we start to even talk about this as the foundation so that we can then truly understand what are some of the signs that we would see with burnout, as well as what are now going to be some of the self-care tips. So let's differentiate the two first. The first is, what is stress? And you know what? We all talk about stress, but we're not always clear about what it is. So let's differentiate. Stress comes from both the good and bad things that happen to us. If we didn't feel any stress, we wouldn't be alive. Now, at times, stress can feel overwhelming, but there are many strategies to help you take control. The thing to really understand is that stress is not always bad. We need that element of stress. At times, it can be a motivating factor. So we just have to look at, when do we now understand that we're past our threshold? Next slide. So when we look at stress from a physiological perspective, stress is the body's response to a real or perceived threat. And that response is meant to get people ready for some kind of action to get them out of danger. That's how it was designed physiologically. But most of the threats that we face today aren't something that we can fight or run away from. These are usually problems that we have to work through. And it's important that we look at the difference between avoiding those certain stresses versus working through them. So we'll start to talk a little bit more about that as we continue. Next slide. So when we talk about what is stress, as we see here, we have somebody who is very overwhelmed with 1,000,001 things. And this may speak to a lot of us, myself included. I will not put myself in this. However, when stress is unhelpful, people may feel overwhelmed or feel that they can't possibly fix the problem. And in these cases, some people avoid dealing with the original problem altogether, which may make the problem and stress worse. So this is what I was mentioning earlier, the difference between working through versus avoiding. A lot of times what happens is we use the coping mechanism of avoidance to provide us with some sort of temporary relief. What happens, unfortunately, and where the difficulty lies, is that within that avoidance, the original problem may become worse. So what we aim to do, and especially for us as psychologists when we're working with people, is how do we work through the stress versus the use of avoidance, which then may magnify the stress. Next slide, please. So it can be, some of the symptoms you're going to notice, especially when you are stressed, is that it can be very hard to concentrate, hard to make decisions, and feel confident when a person experiences a lot of stress. Other times you'll notice some physical sensations as well, like sweating, racing heart, tension in your muscles. And over time, stress can also have a big impact on your health. A lot of physical health related matters can come from overdrawn stress that you've had for a significant period of time. When we look at anything such as high blood pressure, some heart conditions, even a lot of times things like diabetes and or some other certain physical conditions. What's interesting is that while there may be biological factors and genetic factors, those are not the only things that can precipitate some of these physical ailments. What you'll also notice is that stress that has gone unchecked for a long period of time can also contribute to these things. You'll also notice that how you will have people that will suffer from like heart attacks and strokes, where there are other factors such as poor diet, lack of exercise, smoking, drinking, those kinds of things that can contribute to those types of health conditions. Also understanding that stress that has not been adequately managed can also contribute to these health ailments. Here's the other thing: sleep difficulties and headaches are also common problems that are related to stress. People are also most likely to get sick when they're experiencing a lot of stress because we compromise our immune systems when we are under undue stress. So, all of these things we have to take into account when we're noticing that stress is becoming unmanageable. Next slide. So, what is stress? Stress is a reaction to a situation. It isn't really about the actual situation itself. And the reason this is being said is because two people can be in the exact same situation and deal with the situation in very different ways. So the actual situation in and of itself is not necessarily the issue, it is how we react to it. So we usually feel stressed when we think that the demands of the situation are greater than the resources or our resources to deal with that situation. And hence, the person right here talking about, unfortunately, they failed the stress test and now they are stressed. Next slide, please. So, again, poor person, unfortunately, is now going to a place where we're actually possibly looking at burnout. Next slide. So now if we're looking at what's the difference between stress and burnout, burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed and unable to meet constant demands. When we're in this cycle for a significant period of time, this is where we're going to see these elements of burnout. So, stress is not the issue, but stress contributes to burnout. And we have to start being mindful of our body's reaction consistently when we're going to a space of burnout. Next slide. What burnout actually does is that it reduces your productivity and it saps your energy, leaving you feeling increasingly helpless, hopeless, cynical, and resentful. Eventually, you may feel like you have nothing more to give. A lot of times, burnout is when you're giving from an empty cup, an empty vessel. And if we look at the analogy of a car cannot run if you do not put gas in it. So if you are not filling up your tank, you're running literally on fumes and you won't have anything more to give. Hence, at some point, the car has to stop. Next slide. So as we see here, a lot of times, if you've heard the analogy about burning the candle at both ends, this is what we're talking about. You do not have anything more to give. And hence, it's almost like you start to break down. Next slide. So, in many cases, burnout will stem from your job. However, but anyone who feels overworked and undervalued is at risk of burnout. So we do typically connect it with the workforce, but it's not only with the workforce. That combination of being overworked and undervalued. So the harder that you work, you think that you would increase feelings of being valued. But if you continually feel undervalued, this is where that combination is at a higher risk of somebody experiencing burnout. Next slide. So again, but burnout is not caused solely by stressful work or too many responsibilities. There are going to be other factors that can contribute to burnout, including your lifestyle. So again, lack of exercise, lack of sleep, poor nutrition are some lifestyle choices that can contribute to burnout. There's also certain personality traits that may be a bit more susceptible to burnout. We talk about what we call a type A personality. So this is somebody who is, a constant worker, always on the go, always seeking perfection. And in that type A personality, you will notice that they will have more characteristics or more traits that will be more susceptible to burnout. Now, here's the other thing. Whatever you do in your downtime and how you look at the world can also play just as big of a role in causing burnout as work or home demands. So these are some of the elements that you would notice that will contribute to this whole concept or notion of burnout. Next slide, please. So now that we have a definition of both stress and burnout, we want to now bring this now to an area where we talk about in particularly entrepreneurship or leadership. And this is also important because as you are leading either your own company or your team, it's going to be very important to understand some of this. So again, entrepreneurship in and of itself or leadership can be stressful and it can contribute to emotional turbulence because you're in a place of authority and you're also in a space where people are going to be looking towards you for leadership and guidance. So interesting enough, 3 out of 4 venture-backed startups fail, according to research by Shikhar Ghosh. And he's a Harvard Business School lecturer. Ghosh also found that more than 95% of startups fall short of their initial projections. So there's an added element of stress when you are in a space of wanting to either start up your own business, have a team, have staff in front of you. So these are some of the stresses and the statistics that come about, which I think make it a little more difficult in that space of entrepreneurship or leadership. Next slide, please. So, as an entrepreneur or as a leader, you're often juggling many roles. And a lot of times you'll face countless setbacks. So, for example, loss of customers, disputes with partners, increased competition, staffing problems. And as an entrepreneur, a lot of this falls on your shoulders. As a leader, a lot of these things fall on your shoulders. So, what we now look at is that there's the increased likelihood of not only stress, but burnout in these positions. There are some markers that we have to look at when looking at stress and entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So here we go. Complicating matters. New entrepreneurs often make themselves less resilient by neglecting their health. They eat too much or too little. They don't get enough sleep. They fail to exercise. Now imagine if you're in the throes of, starting up a new business or as a leader, in your team, what ends up happening a lot of times since we feel that pressure of things on our shoulders, what we do is we sometimes what we call burn the midnight oil. We want to make sure that everything is done and done properly, and we are the ones taking responsibility for it. Unfortunately, what we do is we sacrifice our health as a result of it. So, for some people, they'll eat too much or too little. I can be guilty of that as well. I'm not going to say that this is an easy balance to have. There are some days where I'll go through the day and I will not. Eat for the entire day. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then there's other people who will eat too much. They're stress eaters, right? So and then what happens a lot of times is that you don't necessarily bring in the more nutritious foods, right? You end up either grazing or picking up things that are not as nutritious. The other thing is about sleep, not getting enough sleep. I need to stay awake. I have work to do. I have things I need to do. And what happens is we neglect our sleep, which then will contribute to lethargy, fatigue, and also failing to exercise. Because even with that, being able to move, which also then helps us overall with our health, but also as well, it also helps for mental clarity and well being. So, what ends up happening here is we push ourselves and abuse our bodies, which then can trigger emotional vulnerability. Imagine, for example, that we fail to do some of these things. How do we usually feel? I know, for example, that when I haven't eaten in quite some time, I feel very grumpy, very tired, and I'm not necessarily my best self until I can address that and actually eat something. It's the same when I don't get enough sleep. I know that I should be sleeping more, but I stayed up late, working on reports or something of that nature. And I get up the next morning and I don't feel like I'm my best self per se. I am more lethargic. I just don't have that energy. So I know that in what I have to do is how do I recalibrate some of this so that I'm able to be a better version of myself going forward, especially as a clinical director and part of my practice. So those are the things I really have to look at when we're looking at stress. Next slide, please. So, what we want to look at is if we're noticing we're going into a place of burnout where we're not our best selves, and actually it's starting to become detrimental to our health. I wanted to provide you with a couple of tips that I think are going to be very important to allow us to navigate this. Now, before we even talk about what the most important tip is, what I also want to make sure that everyone understands is that it's not about an all or nothing kind of thinking, that if I don't do any of this, then there's something wrong with me. Or what I want us to look at is how do we see this on a continuum? We're human. We're not going to necessarily get this right all the time. So these tips are going to be helpful, not necessarily as a yardstick for you to punish yourself if you don't do them, but provide you with a place to monitor yourself, to monitor what it is that you are doing and maybe not doing so that you can recalibrate at any time. So if you see these things on a continuum, you can always address them and not necessarily punish yourself if they're not being done. One of the first self care tips that I would want to impart to you is to make time for your loved ones. Do not let your business squeeze out your connection with human beings. This is so important because we can work ourselves so hard because we want to make sure the business succeeds. We want to do everything we can. There's only a certain amount of time in the day. What we end up doing is neglecting human connection. We don't take the time to spend time with our loved ones. That constant connection is actually who we are as human beings, and that connectedness is going to be important for health. So, and it's connectedness in several ways. I know that for some people, maybe not being able to see each other face to face all the time is going to be helpful. going out with friends, spending time with family, taking time to be connected even over the phone, being able to hear somebody's voice or to message somebody back and forth. So that's where social media things such as WhatsApp and those kinds of things, even texting, and for some people that might be old school, but but what's important is that we continue to maintain that social connectivity and being able to connect with human beings. The more you withdraw yourself and completely dive yourself into your business, what happens is that you start to lose your health from a mental health perspective because you're so entrenched and ingrained in your business. Once you start to lose your health and start to isolate, those become markers that we would see as psychologists for a foray down into mental illness. So we want to make sure, most importantly, that you are remaining connected. Business is important. Working hard is important, but to make sure that you continue that connectivity with other people. And again, we'll also have to, look at whom we are connecting with as well. I think that's another discussion, definitely for another day. But you also want to make sure that the circle around you are people that deserve to be in your space, that they are positive individuals who will provide you with the fuel that you need to be the best version of yourself. Because being connected with human beings is one thing, being connected with negative human beings is another thing altogether. So we also want to be mindful of those connections. Next tip is going to be cardiovascular exercise, a healthful diet, and adequate sleep. This was what I was mentioning before. Now, I'm not here to tell you what type of exercise to do, what diet to follow, those types of things. That's definitely not in my space to tell you what those types of things are. But what's so important is movement, being able to move, whatever that looks like for you. It can be going for walks, it can be participating in some sort of group exercise class, it can be participating in some sort of organized sport, anything of that nature, so that you're able to get the heart rate going and be able to feel your body move. When I talk about a healthful diet, again, I'm not here to promote one diet over the next. I think what's going to be very important is balance and looking at whole nutrition. So being able to not only look at junk foods, but then also looking at as well, whole foods, healthy foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, proteins, whatever that looks like, healthy fats. These types of things I think are going to be the most important. And as I mentioned before, adequate sleep. It is so important. Again, I will say that, it is difficult for me to get adequate sleep, but I've always aimed to try my best to get as much sleep as possible. I think it's interesting, we do have statistics that will say getting at least 8 hours of sleep a night is what's going to be helpful in terms of rejuvenation of body. And I know for a lot of us, it is difficult to get that amount of sleep. But we can use this as a goal. And hopefully, then what we talk about as psychologists and what we talk about with our clients is what we call sleep hygiene, which basically means what is it that we're looking at behavioral wise that we can increase the ability to have increased sleep. So for example, if you are drinking caffeinated drinks right before you go to bed, that can possibly impact your ability to sleep well. So we would then let's not look at caffeinated drinks before you go to bed. Let's look at something that is non-caffeinated as an example. For some individuals, they'll watch TV before they go to bed. And for some people, that helps them to fall asleep. But for others, depending on what you're watching, it actually hinders the ability to fall asleep. So these are some of the sleep hygiene behaviors that we would start to look at to increase the ability to sleep for additional hours, as an example. Next slide. Cultivating an identity apart from your company is also, I think, a great way to take care of self. If you are solely immersed in your company and you do not do anything else, that ends up being an issue. So, for example, what would it look like to volunteer for an organization, being able to maybe, volunteer at a food bank? Or do you volunteer your time on a board for another company so that you're able to, provide your input as a board member? Where do you volunteer? What are other activities that you can also do to again cultivate that identity? Is it that again, is there some organized sport that you would do that you're able to really be a part of and dive into? Right? So this is also very important when we're talking about some of these self-care tips. So you've got other identities outside of what you do. For example, for myself, I volunteer at the board of directors for my church. I was the board chair. I was able to meet with the board, be able to really start to look at how my church would function. And also at a point in time, I did the finances for the board as well. So in that respect, being able to cultivate that other identity and being able to volunteer and volunteer at my church as well in a board capacity, as well as I used to plan events for my church as well. We used to have a yearly health and wellness day where we would have people who would volunteer their time to provide short workshops for not only the members of the church, but for the community as well. So being able to do those things, I think, are also going to be very important as well. Next thing is that you want to reframe failure and loss. So reframe failure and loss can also help leaders maintain good mental health. I think a lot of times what we end up doing is, again, we can tend to what we call catastrophize. And that just means that if there is a failure or a loss that has occurred with an entrepreneur or with the company, unfortunately, what we do is we catastrophize that and then overgeneralize as well with sort of future endeavors with the company. So being able to reframe these failures and loss can also help the company, because what you can do is, how do we learn from that failure or learn from that loss going forward versus catastrophizing it? And this is also going to help leaders maintain good mental health. Next slide, please. Be open about your feelings. This is important because as a leader, you also want to model what's important for not only yourself or for your team. The other thing we also want to make sure is that we're not pushing mental health or issues regarding mental health or mental illness under a rug. So don't mask your emotions, even at the office. When you are willing to be emotionally honest, you can connect more deeply with the people around you. And that's more important, because then you are seen as a human being. You don't have to be rigid all the time. Now, I'm not saying that you are, emotionally volatile, that there's outbursts of absolute anger and rage, or just tearful all the time. But what I think is important is that be open about your feelings. Be open when you're not feeling great at all times. And that helps for you to now connect with your team, with your staff. And then it also provides a window for them to also feel that they can be open with you. That openness increases awareness within your team and within your company. Next slide, please. Some additional tips I think that will also be important to carry you forward. Do not punish yourself for how you are feeling. A lot of times we feel that as a leader, I should be strong all the time. I should be powerful. I shouldn't feel depressed, feel anxious. These feelings of depressed mood, worry, fear, anxiety are normal, and in particular during uncertain times. We now have elements of, being in pandemic and those kinds of things as well, adding on to some of the pressures of being a leader. In these uncertain times, it is normal to have all of these different types of moods. Being able to be open and honest, as I mentioned before, is going to be very important. Now, in particular, during uncertain times, we may have to be flexible in our ways of thinking and dealing with situations. Having that ability to pivot, see things in a different way, sometimes being a bit more innovative, and not necessarily doing things as per norm might also be very helpful in terms of having that ability to shift and to bring yourself as well as your team in a possibly different direction. As I mentioned before, take the time to focus on your own personal wellness. The neglect of personal wellness is going to be something that is so neglectful or difficult if you do so, because if you do this, it ends up being detrimental to your health. Remain active. Go outside for fresh air if possible. And this is something I know I need to do myself because I know sometimes when it's cold, I don't want to go outside. But at points in times, just going outside for some fresh air is going to be important. Again, increasing the consumption of nutritious foods, monitoring your sleep. The other thing you also want to do as well is seek information from a trusted, secure source. Limit your consumption of information. A lot of times, what we do as well to our detriment, especially as leaders and entrepreneurs, is that we are constantly on our social media and we're now looking at information from a variety of social media sources. Now, for a lot of entrepreneurs, we use social media as a way to grow and increase our business, which is fine. But the other thing we also have to be leery of is, are we using social media as competition? Are we looking at our competitors, comparing ourselves, forcing ourselves to work faster, harder, longer to keep up with others? And that will then be detrimental to our own health and well-being as well. Next slide, please. So where do you go if you need help? There are several sources that are places that you can go as a starting point for to get help. The first place would be your family doctor. Your family doctor can be the first pivotal point in terms of the ability to find help. They might be able to assess what it is that's going on beyond your physical, and then they're able to hopefully be able to direct you in the ways that you would need to be referred. So they may be your first place to go. Your second would be your EAP, your employee assistance provider. For many people that are in companies, we do have, or they do have, employee assistance programs where you can have access to brief psychotherapy, and a lot of times we don't utilize those benefits. So that would also be a place where you can go to at least get the process started if you are feeling overwhelmed. There's another area called GP psychotherapists, and they are family doctors or medical doctors who primarily provide psychotherapy, which means if we're looking at something that is covered by our OHIP, it's also a place that you can go to be able to at least get that help that you need and it be covered by our OHIP system. So that's also another place to go. Also looking at CHCs or community health centers and family health teams. We can also look at them because they usually will have social workers or therapists that can also address your concerns. Understanding that within these community health centers and family health teams, there can be a possibility of a wait period as well. Anywhere depending, it can be from several months, and there are some community health centers that have actually closed their availability because of being overwhelmed. Wanted to provide this as an option, but then also understanding that they don't necessarily they are a place of source of space to actually receive this help. We also look at psychologists, social workers, and psychotherapists. The availability is there. It also depends on, they are not, myself as a psychologist, as well as social workers and psychotherapists, are usually not covered under the OHIP system. So it would have to be extended health benefits where you do have that coverage under your extended health, or you're paying privately. But these are some of the areas to just start to look at to explore these things. Next slide, please. So, for effective leadership, what do we want to look at as we bring this workshop to a close? We want to look at what is effective leadership and what does that look like. The first thing of an effective leader is that you are self aware and you prioritize personal development. You want to make sure that you set your goals and that you're also making sure that you are practicing what you preach. If you are not self aware and prioritize personal development for yourself, it's hard to also dictate this for your team. So, this is going to be one of the first things that you're wanting to look at for effective leadership. Next is, an effective leader is going to focus on developing others. It's not only about yourself as the leader is going to be only as good as their team. So you also want to focus on what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of your team, and how can you now motivate your team to be able to focus on their development as well. You also want to encourage strategic thinking, innovation, and action. Encouraging that also with yourself as well as with your team is going to be definitely some of the keys to having a strong team, but also importantly, being an effective leader. You're also going to be looking at being ethical and civic minded, because again, being able to present this as a leader as well, what it does is it provides a great and strong example for your team as well. What you also want to do is model and practice effective cross-cultural communication. And this just means, how do you allow a diverse team, regardless of gender, cultural background, all of these things, how do you practice effective cross-cultural communication? Because you're going to have different personalities in a team, and you want to make sure that you also practice what you want your team to also model and do as well. That increases the efficacy of your team. Next slide, please. So, for effective leadership, leadership is only as good as its leader. So, again, it's going to be of the utmost importance that you ensure that you aim to embody to be as healthy and as strong as possible, being able to take care of yourself, so that as an effective leader, you will be able to transcend that to your team. Taking care of yourself is the key to a strong leader and an efficient and effective team. Next slide, please. So I just have a couple of links here. My hope is that this will be helpful for you as well. On my website, and I know that you'll be seeing my website throughout, we have a link here. If you go to drnatashawilliams.com/selfish, there's a tool here called Embracing Selfishness. It's not what you think. And this provides you with some skills and some tools to now start to really look at taking care of self, so that you can be a strong and effective leader. And we have also here as well, if you go /download, it is a free worksheet for anybody who would like to download it as well, to becoming courageous, empowered, finding your voice, and again, being able to be the best leader that you can be. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. I hope that this has been helpful for you, and hopefully we can continue to keep in touch. Next slide. Here's all of my information, which I know that has been going throughout the workshop. So again, thank you again so much for taking the time, and I hope you enjoyed this workshop this evening. Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed the workshop, and I am now ready for, do we have questions from the audience that we can discuss? So let's see what questions we have, and we're going to take the last few moments of the workshop to go through that. As well, stay tuned to the end of the workshop. We've got a couple of surprises for you as well. So do we have any questions from the audience? And you can actually utilize the chat function, which is going to be on the side panel of the screen, so that you can put your questions in there, and I'll be able to answer them the best way that I can. I know it was a lot of information to give in a short period of time, but my hope is that that it was helpful for you, and that we'll be able to respond to any questions that you may have. So don't be shy, and put your questions in the chat. Oh, great question. What is my self-care routine? That's a great question. So, there's a couple of things that I do for my self-care routine. And the first thing that I do is when I wake up in the morning, I make sure that I spend a couple of moments in prayer. So what that means is that I will wake up a little earlier in the mornings, so that I can, take the time to pray, to sort of thank God for the day, and to sort of set my intentions for the day as well. A lot of people, they will just, get up and sort of start their day. And a lot of times, if you don't set your intentions in terms of, for example, a lot of times my mantra is, thank you, God, for life. Thank you for waking me up this morning. Please go before me, make my crooked path straight, and ensure that I do the best of my ability with everything that I do. So I just sort of put that mantra forward so that I hopefully set the tone for my day. Is it a perfect science? No, but that's sort of one of the first things that I do. The second thing that I've prioritized is exercise. So I exercise at least 4 days a week. I've been blessed to have a trainer as well, and I've been, she's kept me accountable. So even, during the pandemic, she had her program online, and I was able to then continue following her online until things opened back up again. So that's been also very helpful. And I decide to work out in the morning. So when I wake up and I'm praying and I'm in my meditative state, what I do afterwards is that I go to the studio, and I'm able to get a good workout in. Again, it sets the tone for my day. It provides mental clarity as well, and physically I just feel a lot better and a lot more energized. I used to try and work out after work, and it just didn't work for me. So I had to figure out what the routine would be that would suit me. I know a lot of people will work out after work. So, they'll go to the gym after work, and that's what works for them. And that's great. I knew that if I didn't actually wake up and actually do my working out during the morning, that I would be a mess. And the third thing I do in terms of, one of the third thing that I do for my self-care routine is that I do aim to really watch what I put in my body. So I don't necessarily follow a particular diet. So I'm not going to say that, I endorse one diet over the other. I am really about looking at what I ingest and making sure that it's balanced. So I talk about whole nutrition. So fruits, vegetables, nuts, good proteins, good fats, those kinds of things. And the thing is that there are days where, I don't eat that balance, but I do enjoy a variety, and I ensure that I hopefully fuel my body with some of those great things and things that I need. And one of the last things I do for my self-care routine, I know this is a very long answer, but one of the last things I do is I practice a Sabbath. So again, from a religious standpoint, there is a certain, ideal in terms of how a Sabbath is done. For myself, what I do is I ensure that there is a day every day, which is for me Saturday or sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, where I don't open my laptop. I don't do anything that has to do with work or paid work. I will not look at emails. I take that time to rest, rejuvenate, do some of the things that I want to do that are not work related. And because I used to work constantly, 7 days a week, I would take assessments, I would see clients, Monday to Saturday, writing reports on a Sunday. And that to me was that's where my burnout was coming in, because I thought I had to constantly work, constantly take referrals. So I had to put those boundaries in. So I only see clients up until a certain time during the week. And then on top of that, sundown to Fridays to sundown Saturday is what I carve out for myself. And I also limit my social media as a result. So it really is a time for rejuvenation. So I have a next question here, which is, if one's job is naturally stressful, what is the ultimate balance? Here's the thing. Again, I think what's going to be important is that as your job is naturally stressful, we also want to look at what is the main reason for that, for the stress. So, for example, I have a client who her job is stressful, but what was adding on to her stress was that she was taking on jobs from other people in different departments, because she didn't want to ruffle feathers or get in trouble for sort of highlighting what other departments or other managers were not doing. So she would then take on all of that herself. So the first thing we started to look at is, what is your job requirements? What is it that you're required to do? And making sure that others are being held accountable for what they are supposed to do versus you also shouldering that yourself. The other thing is that when your job is naturally stressful, and understanding so, we also then want to make sure is, what else are you putting in to your life so that you can counteract some of that stress. So if my boundaries is that my work is stressful, once I'm off the clock, I'm wanting to do something that I enjoy. Is that, for example, carving out some time to spend some time with friends? Is it that, I'm part of an organized, volleyball league or soccer league, and I'm going to actually either go work out or, go play a sport? Is it a certain hobby that I love to do, and that's what play an instrument or garden? So there's something else that allows you to balance what is stressful so that you have a space where you can decompress. So what happens is that it's not an all or nothing thing. What happens is again, it's on a continuum, and you want to have that balance. But in that balance, sometimes you'll be more, towards being stressed, and then you have to sort of calibrate back. So as a human being, what you're going to do is, how do you then continue to monitor yourself and having something that counteracts, the natural stressful nature of your job. The other thing is, if your job is naturally stressful, you also want to see what is it that you can do while you're at your job. So can you get up for a few minutes, for example, and take a bit of a breather so that you're not in that stress constantly at all times? Can you take that 5 minutes? I know for myself, my job is naturally stressful, but what I also do to actually increase my stress is that sometimes, instead of walking away just to eat lunch, because you deserve to walk away and eat your lunch, I end up eating my lunch at my desk in front of the computer and still working as I'm eating. So I can't even enjoy my food. So as much as things are naturally stressful, I've also had to learn to say, you know what, it is time for me to eat, even if it's just like a 15-minute, 20-minute break, and I'm going to get up. and I'm going to, have something to eat. And I deserve that break to actually taste the food that I am eating. So a lot of it is going to be A, what you're doing in the job to combat the stress, and B, when you're off the clock, what is it that you can do to counteract the stress that you've been under for that specific period of time. So my hope is that helps with the question. Okay, we've got a next question here. What does it take to be a good leader? Oh, that to me is another workshop in and of itself. But thank you for that question, Natalie. Um, I think to be honest, to be an effective, to be a good leader, I think there's going to be a couple things. So first of all, as I mentioned, I think the self-care is going to be important because you're only going to be as effective as you feel. So it is first of all being able to take care of yourself. Once you're able to do that, you can actually model that behavior to your team. If your team sees you, just drawn out, bedraggled, those kinds of things, that makes it very difficult for your team to have confidence in you as a good leader. So a lot of times what is within yourself permeates and it ends up being reflected on your team. One of the second things is after you are taking care of yourself, what you're also going to look at is that a good leader is also going to have a sense of self-confidence. Because again, if you are not confident in the decisions that you are making, you are now not going to be able to project that confidence to your team. And if your team is not confident, it is going to impact your leadership. So being able to be self-confident is also going to be very important as well. And the third thing I would say is not to be self-absorbed, because understanding that leadership is a position of power. So when you are self-absorbed and you decide you want to, or that you decide that you want to abuse that power, what happens is that negatively affects your team. Understanding that the leader has more power than the team per se is one thing. Abusing it is another. So actually understanding that your team is also an important factor in the complete workings of the team is what is going to make an effective leader. You are sharing the power, not just hoarding it all for yourself, and not talking down from a hierarchical perspective where you're talking down to your team. What you want to look at for great leadership is collaboration, still understanding that there is a power dynamic and hierarchy, but also presenting an era of collaboration so that your team's contribution is also being valued. So being able to value your team is also going to ensure that you have effective leadership. So my hope is that those couple of tips are going to be helpful in terms of being a good leader. How do you have discuss? So we have a question here from Joseph. How do you have discussions with people that aren't willing to talk about their mental health? Oh, that's a great question as well. Here's the thing, we cannot force anybody to talk about their mental health. So what we aim to do is provide a space that is safe to have open conversations. So it's not about, talk about your mental health at any time. If that person does not feel safe and doesn't believe that the space is safe, then they're not going to feel open enough to discuss their mental health, because there's so many other factors in terms of the ability for someone to feel open enough to discuss mental health issues. Sometimes the stigma of mental health and in certain ethnic communities is actually very strong. So they don't even open up to their family members or other people in their community, nevertheless in the workplace. So what I would say is the first thing is that making sure that as a leader, as an entrepreneur, when you have your staff, is ensuring that you continuously cultivate a space of safety so that an individual will be able to feel comfortable enough to come to you regardless. So they do not feel that they're going to be judged. Because mental health and mental illness is still seen to be taboo for a lot of people, if I don't have an area in which I feel safe, I'm not going to disclose. So what it is make sure that you are feeling that you are responsible for the area or for the environment that you are creating so that people will feel safe to come to you, period. And then from there, you will increase the likelihood that someone will come and disclose their mental health issues. The other thing as well is you may also want to just approach the individual and say, listen, I am here, if there's anything that you would love to talk about, please feel free to come to me. So even in saying that will also provide an increased likelihood that that individual will want to disclose and open up about either mental health struggles that they're having. I find a lot of times what we believe we can do is actually force somebody or try to really force somebody to try to open up about those issues. And if they're not ready, they're not ready. But what we can do is make sure that the environment is safe enough so that they would actually want to disclose. So, is there one other question? Okay. So, how can we practice effective cross-cultural communication? This is great. Great question. Thank you again, Natalie. Cross-cultural communication and how we practice it, it's about respect, first and foremost. With that, we understand that not everyone is going to agree. So once we're cultivating a space that is safe, we're providing an environment in which all points of view are going to be heard. You may not necessarily come to an agreement, but what's important is that you've provided a space where people can have the opportunity to bring their opinions, their ideas to the table and not feel that they're going to be shut down for whatever reason. So it's being able to bring those to a table and bring them to a consensus. Consensus doesn't necessarily mean everyone is going to agree, but cross-cultural communication means you have that ability to bring all of those ideas and perspectives to the forefront without judgment, and that they have an opportunity for those for that communication to be heard. And once you're able to do that, what it does, again, it may not be that your idea is always the right one, but what you end up doing is, again, providing an atmosphere for that increased cross-cultural communication. So I know that we are very short of time and we're going to be ending this workshop shortly, but we have a giveaway. So it's time for a giveaway. We have 2 giveaways from Puma. So we've got 2 questions. And the first question, whoever answers first will receive the first prize from Puma. So the first question is, what is one of the negative side effects of stress? First person to put their response in will win a prize from Puma. So let's see who responds. Okay. Do we have an answer? Okay, Jennifer Alvarez, high blood pressure. Yes, absolutely. So you will be winning a prize from Puma. Some of the other answers could have been headaches, nausea, feeling overwhelmed, anxiety, sleep difficulties. So we're going to make sure we have your contact information and you're going to receive a prize from Puma. So second question for the second prize from Puma. What is one of the traits of an effective leader? So again, first person to answer, put your answer in and you will win a prize from Puma. You're welcome, Jennifer. I hope you enjoy. So again, question 2, what is one of the traits of an effective leader? Joseph says listening. We will, I want you to expand on that, Joseph, because we gave specific traits. What is one of the specific traits of an effective leader? So listening is part of it. So Mark Williams says taking initiative, taking charge. That's not one of them specifically. I gave 5 specific ones. So again, let's go back to the question one more time. What is the one of the traits of an effective leader? They let others lead. Not quite, Bernadette. We're getting closer. We've got respect. We're getting closer. We had a specific safe space. So we're getting to some of the traits, but I'd give not being self-absorbed. Remember the last slide that I spoke about where I gave real specific responses to this question. So we talked about self-awareness and prioritizing personal development. So one of those are going to be the response. So Ophelia says being truthfully your emotion. Again, not quite. Donathan says good delegator. Not quite. These are all great traits, but they're all subsumed under specific categories that I gave at one of the last slides. So I'm just going to give one other moment to see if we've got the person that's going to being the students. Not quite. Again, great traits, but remember I gave very specific, there's a very specific response. Sandra says serving, again, close. Collaboration. Not being self-absorbed. There we go. Focus on developing others. Natalie, you got it. So yes, Natalie, thank you. You got it. So we got the responses. I know this one was a bit of a difficult one. I know it was going to take a little time. So remember what the main traits were. So Natalie is the one that's going to win the prize. So again, they are self-aware and prioritize personal development. They focus on developing others. They encourage strategic thinking, innovation, and action. They are ethical and civil-minded, and they practice effective cross-cultural communication. Now, all of the other responses fit within these 5, but these are the traits that we mentioned to that question. So thank you so much again for everyone who has joined the workshop today. I also want to thank RBC for sponsoring the workshop series and for having me here. Again, congratulations to both Jennifer and Natalie. And I'm going to say, have a good evening, stay blessed, stay healthy, and hopefully we will connect again soon. Take care and have a good night.